Alright, guys, I'm back. Just reading this paragraph over. So, the history of fertility and a fertility decline is a history of very personal decisions that are often played out upon a backdrop of some conditions that are common to all the modern nations, many of which can be quite impersonal. Urbanization, job availabilities, contraception, and abortion come most immediately to mind. Most of the universal factors are interrelated, but for convenience sake, the factors can be divided into four parts: A. Socioeconomics, B. Legal/technical/medical, C. Lifestyle, and D. Values. Because almost all the factors tend to have pushed are pushed are pushing fertility rates down. Let us now look at the depressant causes first. Oh, this part is actually my favorite, ironically enough. Even though it's the most disturbing, it's weird how that works out. Alright. Socioeconomic factors. Urbanization is one that he points out. At the time of the first U.S. Census in 1790, about 90% of all Americans lived on farms, but the farm population today is only about 2.4%, and poignant stories on television tell us every day of still more farmers leaving the land. As people leave farming as a way of life, fertility almost invariably declines. There is a powerful logic to this pattern. Children are often an economic asset on a farm. They can work the fields, do the chores, but in an urban apartment or a suburban home, children are an economic drag. They go to school during most of the year and often to camp in the summer. If an urban couple decides to have a child or an additional child, they melt they melt they will need to move to a larger, more expensive residence. With more children, it becomes more difficult for the woman of the house to take an outside job. The farm life doesn't typically have an outside job, although, of course, she typically works from dawn till dusk. Um, yeah, that's another thing that I, as a leftist, always forget, that despite what we conventionally considered a job, maybe women didn't necessarily have, because women didn't have access to bank accounts. It was generally just what their husband had. But when it comes to like actual value produced and what they do, women worked a lot. So again, it just depends what we mean by work and what we value, I guess, right? Um, I would have to say working on a farm till dusk, till dawn, till dusk sounds pretty fucking awful. Um, I mean, good work, obviously, just, you know, body wrenching. Despite government efforts to subsidize crops and preserve the family farm, the move from the farm has been inexorable. The recent farm shakeout, due to mostly to bad loan decisions and low prices, has only escalated a trend that has been in motion for centuries and will continue. Not only in the US, but everywhere in the Western world where the rate of people engaged in farming is higher than the US. Italy 12%, France 8%. In Europe today, as in America, there are gigantic warehouses storing unneeded agricultural products: cheese, wine, meat, grain, to begin a long list. Sooner or later, the subsidies will put the cheese, wine, and meat grind in those warehouses, and they will be phased out. More farmers will leave the land, and fertility will fall further. Another issue for him is education. As education goes up for women, fertility goes down. The rates of education for women are at an all-time high in the nations of the Western community, particularly at a college level. In the United States, something quite remarkable has happened. Back in 1960, only about one third of U.S. college students were female. Today, it is half. Parity has been achieved. Many of these college-educated females want to use their education to get a job in the money economy. Money economy? What is... Okay, is there any other economy I should know about? Like, I know that sounds dumb to some people, but the fuck is a money economy? Alright, maybe he means, like, as opposed to farms. Like, maybe that's what he means. A woman at school and then at work is more likely to delay pregnancy. The demographic evidence says that pregnancies delayed to some extent are pregnancies denied. Another issue is wealth. Although logic might dictate otherwise, the correlations are generally clear. As income goes up, fertility tends to decline. Per capita income in the Western community has gone up by 56% since 1965. After discounting for inflation, it continues to increase. It is going up in the US as well. One reason often mentioned for the linkage of high income and low fertility is that well-to-do people get hooked on goods and services available to do well-to-do people, like nice vacations and nice homes. In the mid-1960s, doing research on another demographic book, I visited Hungary, which at the time had the world's lowest fertility rate. Not only that, but it was doing fairly well economically for a communist state. In a nightclub in downtown Budapest, the satirists sang a song entitled Kiski Bagi Koiski, phonetically Kicsivad Kochi. In Hungarian, that is a play on words that says it all. A kid or a car. In addition, wealthy societies typically provide pension benefits. With a pension, parents don't need to have children for their own Social Security. Okay, and another issue he points out, working women. Oh no! This is probably the single most important factor. Demographers have established that when women of childbearing age enter the labor force, fertility goes way down. The rates of young women at work are at an all-time high in the Western world. In the U.S. in the 1940s, only 70% of married women were in the labor force, full or part-time. Today, the figure is 53%. Labor economists believe rates of working women will continue to rise. There are at least two fairly obvious reasons why working women have lower fertility. First, taking time off from work to have a child, particularly several child, can bump a female career worker off the path to quick occupational success. So, in many instances, she doesn't leave her job or delays leaving it and doesn't have a baby, or has one later. And equally obvious, many couples feel that the money provided by the second earner is necessary to maintain a standard of living they have come to enjoy. Again, the woman finds it hard to leave and either doesn't leave the workforce or delays leaving, in each case lowering fertility, at least statistically. So, could you just be stress and like priorities that our bodies knows that it's going through in the process of no longer like generationally pushing out a child, and so our bodies just get used to not doing that? Like, then again, that almost plays on the myth of fecundity. Pretty sure that's a myth, especially saying certain groups of people have like more kids than others, which I've heard that's not necessarily true. So anyways, in late 1986, Newsweek ran a cover story titled "There's a Crowd Dealing with the Rising Rate of Childlessness Among Married Couples Where Both Parties Worked." The piece gives a flavor of some of the attitudes and circumstances that yield low fertility these days. Some excerpts from the interview in the news article. Quote, "There's a real economic burden to raising children," says Nancy Barron, a 30-year-old writer and stage designer in Boston. Barron and her husband, Neil Osterweel, also a writer, decided against children before they were married last year. "Sometimes," she says, "Neil and I joked that we'd have to adopt an 18-year-old, complete with college tuition." Ruth Corson Maynard, 40-year-old director of municipal research for the Wall Street firm, had already decided she didn't want children when she married her husband, David, 9 years ago. He had 2 and didn't want more. Now they live in 2 cities. He works in Boston and spend weekends together. Children would never fit in. Quote, "Maybe we're both just plighted our troths to the responsibility of what came first, and that was our jobs," Ruth Maynard says. This world is a crazy place to try and raise a kid," says Dan Petrie, 28, business manager for a medical center in Chicago. "We could well blow ourselves up before the child has a chance to mature." Petrie and his wife, Marjorie, 29, are active in their church. Quote, "If we wanted to take off to help world causes in Central America or South America, how could we do that with a child?" she says. This way, nothing holds us back. When Bobby and Lynn Bender were married 20 years ago, they decided to postpone parenthood until they established careers. They began trying to have a kid when Bobby was in her early 30s. Nothing happened. "For years I stayed on the pill out of fear of getting pregnant," says Bobby, now 40 and the Associate Director of Finance at the University of Chicago Medical Center. Quote, "Then I find out I can't have children." She doesn't know if she would have been able to get pregnant either. But because she started so late, even adoption, the only alternative, is unlikely. Most agencies prefer to find homes for their infant charges with younger couples. Geez. In any case, Bender and her husband, Lynn, 43, the director of physical planning and construction at the university, feel they are too set in their ways to become new parents. Nonetheless, says Bobby, quote, "There are times when I wake up on Mother's Day and burst into tears. When she meets couples who are able to have children but don't, she is shocked. Quote, I think they're going to regret the decision once they find out that not being able to have a child has become a fact rather than a choice." She says, quote, "You have this hollow core inside of you that will never be fulfilled." Los Angeles writer Milo Frank and his wife, Sally Forrest, an actress, are both in their 50s and have been married more than 20 years. "We didn't set out not to have kids," says Forrest, "but during the years that I would have had them, I was always working or traveling. We didn't think too much about it because we rarely discussed it. When we did, we'd say, maybe next year." Next year never came. Frank says he and his wife now have second thoughts, but, quote, "All I have to do is read the paper or talk to friends who have children, and regrets stop," adds Forrest. Quote, "We're very happy and we're still married. Their friends who were married at the same time all are divorced," she says. Ooh. Noah Appleton, a 43-year-old car dealer in Houston, swirls the ice cubes in his crystal tumbler and glances down at the traffic on Houston's West Loop, 17 floors below. His high-rise condo is one of the city's most prestigious addresses. He explains, quote, "This is one of the biggest reasons why we don't have children. If we had them, we certainly couldn't live here." Appleton and his wife, Janet, the 3-year-old manager of the nurses' temporary agency, say most of her friends are childless too. They found that parents can't take off on unplanned adventures. Quote, "We've made our choice for freedom and spontaneity," she says. Even their Abyssinian cats, Kondo and Minnie, are neutered and declawed. What the Appletons call condo converted, says Janet. They can take care of themselves, and we're free. Free at last, free at last. Great God Almighty, we're free at last, he says sarcastically. Yeah, I think the being blown up part, is kind of meaningless to this book as a whole, because it was pointing out in earlier chapters that, it needs your children for the eventual adulthood of working in the military. Um, it's selfish to the system to not have kids based on all these new workers that they'll eventually need. So it's really like it's really sad, honestly. Legal, technological / medical factors, and this is another issue. Abortion, again, an issue that he's talking about for low fertility. Abortion, in most Western countries, abortion was illegal until the mid 1970s. Today, abortion is legal in 19 out of 21 community nations, representing 94% of the community population. The number of abortions performed each year in the Western nations is estimated at least 6 million. In America alone, there are about 1.5 million legal abortions performed each year. Obviously, the lowest fertility rates to come exist, even though many abortions were performed illegally prior to legalization. The possibility of additional Supreme Court appointments by the President Ronald Reagan has led to speculation that Roe v. Wade, the decision that legalized abortion in 1973, could be overturned outright by a new, more conservative court. That is dubious. There are some sitting judges who favor outright repeal of Roe v. Wade, but others who are opposed to Roe v. Wade are believed to favor only modifications of the decision, which would still allow legal abortion. More important, even if Roe v. Wade were wholly repealed by the Supreme Court, it would not likely mean the end of legal abortion in America. Prior to 1973, many states had legalized abortion to one degree or another. Those states' laws would likely remain in effect, and accordingly, abortion would still be legal under some circumstances in states with 42% of the U.S. population. That, in effect, would make it legal and accessible for the vast majority of population living within a short ride or plane trip to the state with legal abortion. Of course, the state could then illegalize abortion over time, or others could legalize it. In any event, abortion will likely remain a legal option for most Americans for decades to come.